kidnapping, extortion, and murder.
This case was in a league of its own.
A panorama of tawdriness unmatched in Miami's rather tawdry history.
Bodybuilders running amok in paradise.
They duct taped his eyes.
What began as an extortion plot ended up in murder.
Pistol whipping him across the face. Boom, they hit him with a car.
What they lacked in morals, they made up for in greed.
A brazen, twisted scheme so strange, police refused to believe it even happened. Until it happened again.
My worst nightmare looks like it's come true. The gang has struck again.
It reads like Pulp Fiction. Businessmen dripping in new money. Bad guys all hopped up on greed and steroids. An incredibly diabolical plot, and a telltale breast implant. And where would a story like this be set? Miami, anyone?
Miami is a place of sun and sand and sex. Gyms are everywhere. Pumping up and being beautiful and being able to show off your physique is part of the way of life here.
There is huge conspicuous consumption here. It's a boom town, and there are lots of sources, both legal and illegal, for that kind of boom town atmosphere.
It's a place that people who have wealth are attracted to, and it's a place where people who want wealth are attracted to. And I think in this case, the two of those factors came together in a violent way.
No one personified nouveau riche Miami more than Hungarian millionaire Frank Griga. He was just a car salesman when he arrived in Florida, but a few short years in paradise later, he was a self-made millionaire.
Frank must have been about 25, 26 when he really started to make money. And first he was like a kid in a toy store. I remember when he first bought his Lamborghini. He chose the color, and then when he picked it up, he was so happy. That was the happiest in his life, when he picked that car up. If there was anyone making the American dream happen, I think Frank was one. He really wanted to have a slice of it, and he did.
Right about the time that Griga came to this country and started working in businesses, 976 numbers were an enormous profit center, and he was smart enough to cash in on that.
He realized that you could actually provide a little bit more than information. You could provide entertainment. He had about 40 or 50 such lines. 9 Romance was a major one, I know. 976 Tits, which was kind of more sexually explicit.
Griga was making millions from pay-per-minute phone lines, and he and his live-in girlfriend, Christina Furton, were living the high life. There was a Miami Vice mansion on the water, a private yacht, and a stable full of luxury cars to keep the Lamborghini company. But trouble was lurking in Griga's rearview mirror, and he never saw it coming.
It was Memorial Day weekend, and they were supposed to go to the Bahamas. The next day, the housekeeper came. She saw the dog there, and that was weird. The dog wasn't supposed to be there. Frank would never leave the dog there unattended. That was the first sign that something bad is happening to them. She actually saw Frank's passport was lying on his desk, and that was a sign they never went to the Bahamas in the first place, because, you know, you need a passport to go to the Bahamas. It was very much out of character for him to be missing. We always knew where he was.
So their friends contact the police, and they basically tell them everything. You know, we have a couple of friends, and they're very conscientious. They would never leave their dog at home alone, and they just disappeared off the face of the earth. So the police start to ask questions, and one of the questions they ask is, who were they last seen with?
The very last phone conversation I had with Frank was on the day of his disappearance. He was approached by 2 businessmen. They were offering him some kind of potential cable business in India. These 2 guys were big, they were bodybuilders, they were very showy, expensive suits, expensive watches. Gaudy is the word, I think.
Muscle-bound dudes in Armani flashing a little bling? Well, that only describes like half the population of Miami. But there was something about these 2 that set Griga on edge.
Frank really had a very weird feeling about these two people. And he said, well, I'm going to give it one more shot. I'm going to go out to dinner with them and I will listen to what they want to say one more time. And that was the last time I spoke to him.
At this point, all police had to go on was a housekeeper telling them that these people were missing, and some other person who was able to tell police that they had seen the couple going out to dinner with a couple of guys who looked like bodybuilders.
The police department simply treated him as another person who is young, who is wealthy, who likes to run around, who likes to travel, and they didn't take it seriously.
Then they found the Lamborghini. A very expensive car, abandoned, wealthy couple missing, and that's when the police really began to dig into this case and worry about the possibility of foul play.
Cops try to get a lead on the two men who met with the couple before they disappeared.
The names Lugo and Doorbal come up, and all of a sudden it's like a light switch comes on.
Daniel Lugo and Adrian Doorbal, co-workers at a joint called the Sun Gym, were suspects in another rich guy kidnapping plot already under investigation.
Sun Gym was a magnet for all kinds of bad guys. I felt that these guys were the baddest people I had ever come in contact with. So now it's happened. My worst nightmare looks like it's come true. The gang has struck again.
Who are these bodybuilders, and what have they done with Griega and Furton? And why are the police so familiar with the Sun Gym? While investigating the missing Miami phone sex millionaire and his girlfriend, police stumble onto another investigation involving the same pumped-up bad guys. Delving into this earlier case would lead police into a depraved world of greed and violence unlike anything they'd ever seen before. It all started at a testosterone factory called the Sun Gym.
Sun Gym was a gym out in Miami Lakes that was started by John Meese, a CPA, who was also a frustrated bodybuilder. The Sun Gym was a place that they wanted to be massive, a different kind of clientele.
There are other people who were apparently taking steroids and using that to build up their muscles. So it was it was something of a musclehead kind of gym.
Gym owner John Meese may have been a prominent accountant, but this venture was hemorrhaging hard. Meese was desperate for someone to save his house of pain. Then along came Daniel Lugo.
Daniel Lugo seemed to have been a pretty persuasive guy with John Meese, filling him full of ideas of grandeur about the marketing possibilities of the Sun Gym brand and how they could expand and get into various kinds of food products or clothing, that sort of thing.
Lugo promised Meese they'd build an empire from the ashes. He was so convincing that Meese hired him on as manager. But Lugo had a past. He had just finished a stint in federal prison for fraud.
Daniel Lugo used the Sun Gym as a big networking opportunity. He was always looking for a way to grab a quick buck. And he was identifying people as either possible cohorts in this kind of activity or targets. Daniel Lugo certainly seems to have had something magnetic about him, because an awful lot of people were willing to do an awful lot of terrible things on his behalf.
And that was the beauty of the Sun Gym. Whatever scheme Lugo cooked up, all he had to do was step into the weight room to find some hulking freak to help him get the job done. He found the perfect disciple in Adrian Noel Doorbal.
Doorbal, at first sight, was the one you said, oh yeah, that guy's a bodybuilder. He was massively muscled, had long dark hair. It certainly seems that Adrian Doorbal had a big attachment to Daniel Lugo. They seem very quintessentially Miami muscle guys. They build their bodies to be out and about and seen. They were enamored of a lot of the trappings of the fast Miami lifestyle.
But that kind of flashy lifestyle requires deep pockets, and their measly paychecks just weren't cutting it.
And when George Delgado walked through the Sun Gym doors, it certainly seems like Daniel Lugo quickly identified him as somebody who was around money and who might be a partner in some of his fast buck ideas.
So when Delgado wants a personal trainer, Lugo gets the job. And one day, in between sets, Delgado starts complaining about a fat cat entrepreneur named Marcelo Schiller.
Mark Schiller was a businessman from Argentina who ran a sort of investment and insurance kind of company. Schiller had a lot of money. He had a multi-million-dollar estate, houses, money, cars.
Delgado was all pissed off because he bought some sort of Medicare billing business from Schiller and he felt that he'd overpaid.
Delgado increasingly, particularly after he met Daniel Lugo, became convinced that he was getting the short end of the financial stick from Mark Schiller, and Mark Schiller then becomes their target.
Delgado, Lugo, and Doorbal cooked up a get-rich-quick scheme that couldn't fail. They'd kidnap Schiller, torture him, and force him to sign over all his assets.
They had several plans. One of the plans called for them to lay in his front yard underneath camouflage blankets, and as he came out to get his paper in the morning, they would jump up and say, "Aha, we got you," and they'd grab him and throw him into a van. It's a pretty silly scheme.
It took them several iterations of their plot, because little things kept going wrong, and they seemed to be fairly easily spooked by those little things that weren't going just according to the book.
Lugo had enlisted several other pumped-up punks from the Sun Gym to help nab Schiller, but each time they tried, their cartoonish plans failed. Frustrated, Lugo and Doorbal added some more muscle. But this guy would be kept in the dark about their real plans.
I had just walked into the gym, and Noel, he tells me, "Listen, you know, there is this scumbag drug dealer that owes me a lot of money, and I was wondering if you can help me collect from him." I specifically told him, "I'm not gonna do anything illegal. I'm not gonna beat up anybody for you. So under those conditions, if you just want me to intimidate so this guy can pay you, then I'll do that, you know." I got in the van with Noel Doorbal, and we were off.
On November 15th of '94, they set up outside of Mark Schiller's deli in far west Miami-Dade. It's not a heavily traveled area, but at 4 in the afternoon, they saw their chance. There was nobody else around.
I remember the day so clearly. It was an overcast day. The guy gets out of his restaurant. I believe he's wearing jeans and a white polo shirt. It was seconds afterwards that I came to the realization that this was not what was told it was. They grabbed the guy and they started tasing him. And the guy is hanging on to the steering wheel of his 4Runner, hanging on for dear life. And I said, "Oh my God, what is this?" They dragged the guy to the door of the van, and I'm petrified. Noel yells at me, "Grab him, grab him." Go, 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 go. I got scared, and I did. I grabbed him. They duct taped his eyes and they duct taped his wrist. We took off, and Noel keeps trying to call this number. He said, "The eagle has landed. The eagle has landed."
The Sun Gym gang had finally accomplished their first audacious crime, abducting wealthy businessman Marcelo Schiller. Now all they had to do was separate the millionaire from his money, and that would get very, very messy.